Needle felted unicorn, how to make it. Let's find out. Hey, it's Pam Duthie and it's a Thursday, so it's another needle felting tutorial. Every Thursday I make needle felting tutorials, and right now we're right in the middle of trying to see what makes we can create out of the World of Wool needle felting beginners kit. So if you like needle felting tutorials like this, don't forget, check back every Thursday. So the colours in the white World of Wool needle felting kit did for some reason say unicorn to me, so I thought I'd give that a go, just using what they give us in the kit, excluding the needle. As I've already stated before, I couldn't work with that needle. So if you'd like to make a unicorn like this, let's see how I made him. So before we get started, you're going to need to make him some curls for his mane and his tail, and I made them myself using a skewer, using the method I describe in my needle felting curls tutorial, which I'll link to in the cards up above. So get these done first of all. It'll take about a day for them to dry up and be ready for you. You could use a hairdryer if you're in a hurry, but to be honest, the time it's going to take for the rest of your unicorn, your curls can be drying off. So let's have a look down below and see how I made him. So first things first, we're using the two pipe cleaners provided in the kit and bending them both into an N shape to make the frame for the horse, and then taking these two pieces and wrapping them together around the middle, and this makes an H shape for our horse. And I'm using the palest blue colour for his main body colour, and I'm just separating this out into manageable strips and going to be wrapping all the way up his legs and over his body. Now it is a bit easier to use a carded bat to make the body of your animals, but I was just using what we were given. So you've got to be kind of careful where you're wrapping. As you can see, you sort of get lines, wrapping lines, where all the fibres are going the same way. So it takes a bit of felting to clear this up, but it's perfectly manageable. So just use the one piece, wrap it as far as it'll go, and then tack it on a little bit with a needle, and then get on with wrapping the rest until I've got the entirety of the pipe cleaner. I start on the small sculptures. I start wrapping the legs from the bottom of the leg, from where the foot's going to be, rather than the top. This just gives me a wee bit more control, and any excess goes into the body rather than having to get the right lengths of fibre and starting from the top and wrapping down, but whatever you're comfortable with. And try and get it as smooth as possible. As you can see, while I'm wrapping here, I do have some kind of lumps going on, but I'll deal with that in the felting. But the better you are at winding it, then the easier it's going to be to felt. And then once all the legs and the body is covered, tack it on a little bit more, and then I'm just going to beef up the body a little bit more because that's far too skinny for a horse. So using more strips, I wrap them from top to bottom, tack that on, and I wrap all the way around as well, just until I'm reasonably happy that he's a little bit more beefy. And I'm going to take a good bit of time smoothing this out, felting it, keeping the needle going in all directions, keeping the piece moving. You add fleece as and when needed if you see any patches forming that need covered a bit more, but just felt for a good amount of time until you have a nice smooth shape like this. Now I'm working on bending the leg, so it's easier if I felt a straight line, but I usually felt a straight line, but the pipe cleaners are quite solid, so I'm able just to fold the legs down, and then I'm just felting over them a little bit, felting over the joints so they're in position, and then I'm turning the hock of the horse, which is just turning down the last half an inch or so, and then making a curve for the knee, for the main bit of the leg, and I'm just bulking out that area by taking off two strips of fleece and felting them from the hock joint right up over the knee and out over the bum in a sort of C shape. So there's more padding happening on the bum, and then it's wrapping around to the front of the knee, and I'm just felting up the leg like that, giving it a nice wee bit more bulk. Now the reason I don't make these shapes off the piece and then felt them onto it is if I'm just using a bit of fluff
and felting there and then I have more control over the shape. You can see with my fingers I'm manipulating it, I'm squeezing it, I'm moving it a bit, just so it fits perfectly on the body. And now looking at the body, he's a bit skinny, so I'm adding a bit more fluff, rolling it into a tube and putting it underneath, just so he's a bit fatter, because horses do tend to have quite thin legs and fairly substantial bodies. So I've popped that tube on, but I'm manipulating it. It's not very firmly felted at all when I put it on, and I just start felting over the whole thing. And again, going over the whole body, keeping it moving, making sure the bits I've added to the legs and the bits I've added to the body all smoothly blend into each other. If needs be, adding a wee bit of fluff at any edges to make sure that it blends nicely. But just felt. I honestly just take this in front of the telly, put a box set or something on and sit and felt away and forget about it. It's going to take a good hour or so to get past this stage. So take your time. That's the joy of needle felting. It does take a bit of time, but it's really worth it with the individual sculpture. And you can see after an hour, it's starting to look much smoother. So now we're going to work on the head, which is quite a simple shape really. I'm just making a tube about 1.5 inches long, I think here, and firming it up and making the ends a little flatter for his nose. And then I'm just going to add that the shape of a horse is sort of a tube and then sort of a ball, a lump at the bottom. So I'm just putting a little bit more padding along the underneath at the back of the head. This is kind of the jawbone, and I'm popping this on. So it's like a tube and then a lump at the top on the bottom of it, and I'm felting this out. Again, this is easier in a core wool. The roving is more difficult to get smooth, so that's why I'm adding another piece, wrapping it right round just to bring the tube and the lump together into one shape, and just felting all over it to try and get it nice and smooth. As you can see, moving the piece in between my fingers in all directions, squishing it up, and I'm trying to smooth out the end of the nose as well, just to get that a nice smooth shape. And we're just running this until it gets nice and firm, keeping the needle going, and this gives us a head shape fairly easily actually. And then I just want to start working on the mouth, which is just going to be low down at the bottom of the end of the nose. I'm just felting backwards and forwards a straight line, and this straight line gives him his mouth. Or we'll get there in a minute. As I say, just take your time smoothing out the entire head. It's got to be fairly firm. And this is us working on the mouth, just backwards and forwards, and you can see I make a dent in the end of the nose, low down towards the bottom, just a straight line. This gives us his mouth. Once we're happy with that, I'm just going to work on his nose, which is simply, I'm getting 2 really small pieces of fleece, winding them around the needle. You can use anything you've got lying about, but I find a needle really helpful. And then dead carefully between my fingers, I'm felting this into a really skinny tube. Got to be careful, but if you take your time, you're not going to stab yourself, and it's actually easier to manipulate things between your fingers than anything else. You just pinch it and then gently run the needle in between your fingers. And I honestly don't stab myself that much doing things like this. And if you're gentle with a needle, you don't hurt yourself. And then these little these tiny skinny tubes we've got, these are going to be his nostrils. So I'm just felting them above the nose into inward facing C shapes here. This gives the impression of his nose, and I'm wanting the center bit where it is the nostrils, I'm keeping that edge kind of sharp and pushing it in because the nostrils are inwards, and as we go I'm trying to smooth out the tops where my finger is just now. I'm wanting the tops of the nostrils to smooth out more onto the back of the horse. You can add the back of the horse's head. You can add a bit of fibre along that back section as well, just to smooth it out so it's not quite such a firm ridge on the back. And then once you're happy with that, I'm going to want to attach the head to the body. I find this easier to take a long piece of felt, attach it to the head of the horse, and then gently hold the head roughly where you want. So I hold the head where I want it to be in relation to the body, at the distance I want it to be. This is a bit fiddly, but you get used to it in the end. And then I just felt into the fluff, and it slowly builds up in the position I want the head to be. And just literally felt, and it starts to take the shape of a neck. Again, I don't make the shape off the body and stick it on, because then I find it harder to get the length right and maybe the thickness. This way you're sculpting it as you go along. Just hold it in the position and felt, and you start to see what areas need a wee bit more fleece, what less. You can squish it, you can manipulate it, move the needle about, and in not too long a period of time, it starts to take on a bit of structure. The head can hold itself, support itself on the body. And remember, there's wire in the legs and everything, so you can move them out of the road to get more access all round for the neck, to attach the neck to the body in a fairly seamless way. And here you can see, after about an hour more of sculpting, this is what he starts to look like. And where there are seams, I'm just adding little bits of extra fluff just to smooth out the seams. A lot of this isn't really necessary because it's actually going to be covered up with the mane, with the curls, but I just like to have a nice, really smooth piece. And it is harder to work with roving than it would be with tops. You have to sometimes just pull off little bits of fleece and kind of fluff it up between your fingers to get a nice piece that can cover any lines. Roving is difficult not to have lines on. And as you can see here, I'm just breaking off two pieces about the same size to make some ears for him. I fold them into a V shape and gently felting between my fingers to get a nice flat V shape. Again, this is just a bit easier than trying to use it on a stabbing cushion, because I've got complete control over the thickness of the piece and where it's going. I'm just keeping the piece moving and stabbing up and down until I get this nice triangular shape that's going to be his ear. Obviously we need to make 2 of these, and take your time. Again, it's not as tough as you think it is. I'm just felting along the lines of the edges to make this V shape. If you keep on felting and then as the needle's going through from the edge into the piece, you're felting the whole piece in the one go, which is a lot easier than trying to hold it flat on a cushion and felting down into the cushion. And what happens there is the fibres will poke out into the cushion. You've got to pick it up and turn it over. What I'm doing here is the needle is taking the fibres from the edge of the ear and into the centre of the ear. So we're actually giving more felting for each stab of the needle. The fibres are going into the piece rather than into some kind of cushion. So I actually find it quicker. And I'm just, at this point, I'm seeing that the front legs are a little bit short and a little bit wimpy. So just adding a little bit extra here as well to butch them up. And that's what to do when you're looking at your piece. See if it needs anything and just add some more to it. All the time looking, felting some more, adding wee bits of wool. But yeah, quite often once I've added the head, I see that the front legs need a bit more work. So I've just butched him up, made him a tiny bit taller there. And now adding the ears to the top of his head, just nice and careful again, holding them in position and then felting down from the ear into the head. If needed, if there's any lines again that looks like it's joining, just add a tiny bit of fluffed up fleece to smooth them out, and take a good bit of time because you want all these joints to be seamless. Horses' ears grow as part out of their head. They aren't just stuck on. So carefully felting through the ear into the head and trying to make sure that there's no seam there, and also making sure it's nice and firmly felted on so the ears hold themselves up. there's no point having floppy ears. He's not some kind of a donkey. He's a unicorn. They're supposed to be quite gracious and lovely. That's my theory anyway. And just looking at the angle of the ears and making sure that you're happy with that. And now again, wrapping around the needle to make an extra little tube of fibre. And carefully felting that and making the top more pointy and the bottom flatter. And then I'm just taking off tiny strips of each of the other colours. This is going to be his unicorn horn in case you haven't guessed. So taking off tiny strips of each of the colours and just rolling them into skinny sausages so they hold together a little bit easier. And then I'm going to take these by the very ends, which is a bit skinnier. I'm going to felt that into the skinny top of the unicorn horn and just gently twist this all the way down. This gives us a nice kind of magical, strange looking, different, variegated coloured unicorn horn. So I'm just felting it so it's sharper at the top and getting wider and flatter to the base. And this I'm just going to pop on to the front of his head, just down from his ears and in his forehead pointing up. Obviously you can make this as small or as big as you want, just whatever you feel looks decent. There's no right or wrong, because I'm sorry to tell you that unicorns don't exist, and light blue coloured unicorns definitely don't exist. So felting that in place, and then we're just using the darker blue colour to make his hooves. So just little strips of the darker blue colour, I'm just wrapping them round onto the very end of his feet and felting that in for all 4 of his feet. Just gives a little contrast in colour. And what I make sure and do, I felt them in, try and make it the same thickness as his feet, and I'm going backwards and forwards along the bottom to give a nice flat bottom to his feet. So do that to all 4 hooves. Make sure and felt it fairly solidly, because that's going to take the entire weight of the piece. I know they don't have a whole lot of weight, but still it's kind of important to make sure that it holds up and his legs don't start getting floppy. So there, he's got his 4 hooves on, and the next bit, now we're on to the fun bit of decorating him. So the curls that I made, I'm just separating them up into individual thinner ringlets and just grabbing them out in lengths of what I want the tail to be, separating them and pulling shorter lengths if I feel the need to, and just holding them all at one end, letting the other ends hang free, and this is going to become his tail. So I just picked together an amount that I think looks relatively good and pinching them all together at the top, and then this area where I've pinched, I'm just going to felt this together so that just gently between my fingers as before, making sure that all these ends hold together, and then it flies out crazy at the bottom. And then we're just going to felt this onto the bum of your horse, and this is his tail. Take a bit of time felting it in to get this end nice and firm. And then we're going to pretty much do the same again to get his mane. Now, because there was nothing in the kit that I could use as eyes, I decided to give him a shaggy long mane in front that'll cover his eyes. So picking pieces about the right length and putting them from just between his ears, letting them flop down either side of his unicorn horn, covering up the place where his eyes would be. Like I say, we don't have anything in the kit to make eyes, so I'm just covering them up with his hair, which actually I think gives quite a cute expression anyway. And for his mane, I'm just getting a nice strip of pieces all about the same length, and I'm laying them down right across his neck. And then we're going to staple this on with a piece of fleece. So I'm just using the the light blue fleece and just pulling out a thread, so that's just a strip that I've twisted together, and felting this down the centre of his neck. And this sandwiches these curls just down that centre bit and holds them in place. And then I'm just going to fold that in half over to the left hand side. I just like them to go down the left, and then felt up that centre bit again so they're doubly attached. And you have a nice mane for your unicorn. And that's it. That's him done, just sculpting the curls into place.
Okay, I hope you liked seeing how I made my unicorn. If you make one like him, I would love to see, so don't forget to tag me. Come back every Thursday for more tutorials and click on my wee face to subscribe. Thank you so much for joining me.